feel like we have the doors closed to the Faith Center at Lutheridge?
Because we have to keep people out. Okay.
Oh, someone else is sharing their screen. So if you can stop sharing your screen so I can.
Oh, can we tell who's sharing screen?
This meeting is being recorded.
person mastering the music turns it down, we can go into
with my life domination. You realize all the time.
Reimagine the fierce urgency of now. I am so excited to see all of you here. It is 6:36. We've got 24 people in the room. You think we should try to wait till we get 25 to get started? Or should we go ahead and get started? Oh, we got 2 people in the waiting room. They gonna come on in. So I'm gonna kick this thing off with a quote from whence the fierce urgency of now was themed. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There's no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action, said Dr. Martin Luther King in his Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence speech in 1967. Our Alternate Roots mission. Alternate Roots is an organization based in the Southern USA I haven't shared Nary's screen.
And Lauren, we'd also like to go ahead and get our interpretation started. So
Okay.
we can do so that people that might need Spanish interpretation.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Maria Luisa, who will be giving our Spanish interpretation. Or who am I passing it to?
Lila.
Hola, muchas gracias y saludos a todos. Yo soy Lila y mis pronombres son ella y ella. Y estoy aquí hoy con mi compa y intérprete María Luisa. Sus pronombres son ella. Y somos miembros del colectivo de justicia del lenguaje, Pancha Lenguas, basado en Bulbancha, Louisiana. So greetings, y'all. I'm Lila and my pronouns are she and they. And I am joined today by my comrade and co-interpreter, Maria Luisa, pronouns she and her. We are members of Bancha Lenguas Language Justice Collective based in Bulbancha, Louisiana. Y la justicia de lengua es nuestro derecho a entender y ser entendidos, de hablar en el idioma en que nos sentimos más poderosos. Language justice is our right to understand and be understood in the language in which we feel most powerful. Antes de comenzar, queremos compartir sobre cómo va a funcionar la interpretación. So before starting, we want to share how interpretation will work. Si estás usando una computadora, busca un icono de globo al pie de tu pantalla con la palabra interpretación. Haz clic sobre él y selecciona inglés o español. Si están usando un teléfono inteligente o una tableta, busca 3 puntos que leen más, haz clic y te aparecerá una lista. Haz clic sobre interpretación, selecciona inglés o español y luego haces clic sobre finalizar. Solamente las personas que entienden español e inglés pueden permanecer en la línea sin interpretación. So if you are using a computer, look for a globe icon at the bottom of your screen with the word interpretation. Click on it and select English or Spanish. If you are using a smartphone or tablet, look for 3 dots that read More. Click on that, and this will prompt a list. Click on Interpretation and then select English or Spanish, and then click Done. Only folks who understand Spanish and English may stay off the interpretation channel today. So todos, por favor, seleccionen silenciar audio original para escuchar sola la voz del intérprete. Si desea escuchar el audio original en un volumen más bajo, en el trasfondo, puedes quitarlo de mudo. Puedes regresar en cualquier momento para cambiar tu selección. So everyone, please select mute original audio to hear only the voice of the interpreter. If you would like to hear the original audio at a lower volume in the background, you may leave it unmuted. And you may go back at any moment to change your selection. So a couple of best practices, algunas mejores prácticas. Por favor, hable un paso lento y constante. Si estás hablando muy rápido, no verás hacer esta señal de manos, que significa ir más despacio. Invitamos que lo hagan también. Es posible que sea difícil vernos en la pantalla así, y así que pedimos que le echen un ojo al chat por si enviamos un mensaje pidiendo que vayas más despacio. So please speak at a slow and steady pace. If you are speaking too fast, you will see us make this hand signal, which means to slow down. We invite you to do this as well. It may be hard to see us on your screen, so we may ask that you please keep an eye on the chat in case we send a message asking you to slow down. Habla en voz alta y clara. Si tienes audífonos con micrófono, utilízalos. Haremos esta señal con la mano si no podemos escucharte. Están todos invitados a hacer lo mismo. También enviaremos un mensaje en el chat. Speak loudly and clearly. If you have headphones on with a mic, please use them. We will make this hand signal if we can't hear you. You are all invited to do the same, and we will send a message to the chat. Please remember, por favor recuerden mantener su micrófono en mudo si no estás hablando. Please remember to keep your mic on mute if you're not speaking. También una persona a la vez. Las intérpretes solamente pueden interpretar una voz a la vez y no queremos estar en la posición de tener que decidir cuál voz privilegiar sobre otra. So remember, one speaker at a time. Interpreters can only interpret one voice at a time, and we don't want to be in the position of having to decide which voice to privilege over the other. Y si eres bilingüe en español e inglés, siéntate libre de cambiar de idioma. Solo pedimos que no cambies el idioma en medio de una oración. And if you are bilingual in Spanish and English, feel free to switch back and forth between English and Spanish. We only ask that you please do not switch in languages in the middle of a sentence. Y últimamente, no sufras en silencio. Si hay algún problema con la interpretación, por favor déjanos saber en el chat o envía un mensaje a los anfitriones. Crear un espacio bilingüe virtual es una experiencia nueva y requiere paciencia para ir más lentamente, para poder terminar juntos. Gracias al equipo de Alternate Roots que hizo esto posible y gracias por aprender con nosotros. So remember, don't suffer in silence. If any issues with the interpretation arise, please let us know in the chat box or send a message to one of the hosts. Creating a bilingual virtual space is a new experience for all of us, and it will take patience to move a little slower so we can all get there together. Thank you to Alternate Roots staff who made this possible, and thank you for your commitment to learn with us.
All right. Thank you so much, Bancha. We appreciate you growing with us. Another accessibility feature we have is closed captioning. You can access the CC feature or closed captioning feature at the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. Pronouns. Our gender equity work group reminds us to all change our profile name to include our pronouns. So if you have any issues changing your pronouns, all you would do is hover over your image and click the three buttons three dots next to mute, and then you will hit rename, and then you can change your name to include your pronouns. So please do that, everyone, at this time. Now, we want to know where you're Zooming from. As you're adding your pronouns, drop in the chat where you're Zooming in from. If you know the names of the indigenous people, and I'm going to just start sharing my screen now. As a transparency amongst the facilitator at this moment. All right. So yeah, go ahead and drop in the chat. If you know the names of the indigenous people who are stewards of the land you're currently occupying, feel free to drop in the chat too. If not, we invite you to learn more about land acknowledgement. And in one of the websites is native-land.ca is one, but there are many, okay? Now, please remain on mute unless we're instructed to come off. This helps with the speakers and the interpretation team. If you're having tech issues, reach out to one of the people you'll see me and myself and someone else. We have tech support. Feel free to reach out to one of us, okay? Now, we have some community agreements, and someone's actually going to drop a link to those community agreements in the chat right now. So Roots operates in a space and virtually together with our community agreements. And so we just ask that you look through those if you're not familiar. And I just wanted to go ahead and also note that our wellness team reminds us to take care of ourselves before and while we're in this virtual space. And so we'll drop those tips in the chat as well so that you can review those. But please feel free to take Zoom breaks. I did the math today and I was like, I was on Zoom 10 hours yesterday. Had a good time, don't get me wrong, but it can be a lot. So take care of yourselves, drink water, have your food next to you if that's your thing. Feel free to take movement breaks. So I deeply encourage that. And so as we move forward in the evening, I just want to acknowledge that we did say that there would be a studio visit. Right now, we have postponed that for technical difficulties, but I'm really excited about introducing Ron Regan and Maria Cherry Rangel. Both of them hold very deep places in my heart. And so I'm really excited about their research. And I'm not going to even try to introduce it because it does its own justice. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Ron Regan and Cherry Rangel.
Hey all, good evening. Thank you so much for spending Saturday evening with us. We're really excited to talk with y'all about freedom maps. I'm Maria Cherry Rangel, Cherry for short. My pronouns are she and they. And I am a cultural organizer, a resource mobilizer, a writer and researcher, a dance artist, and many other things. And Ron, you want to introduce yourself?
Peace, y'all. This is Ron Regan. Zoom in your way from Bobancha. It's just Choctaw language. This place we now call New Orleans, some of us. I am really excited to be with you all as well. He, him pronouns work fine for me or anything lovingly offered. Excuse my pace, slowing down for the interpretation team. Yes, I sing, I write creatively, I make performance work, and also I like to think I have a coat of many colors, if you will, with a lot of different patches. So I got a lot of little swatches, including philanthropic and nonprofit arts and cultural consulting, if you will, on research, writing, strategy, all things to help move money and resources to the folks doing work on the ground, especially in the South. So really excited to share the results of the research that Cherry and I conducted with you all this evening.
Yeah, and so we just wanted to take a moment to kind of contextualize this body of work with what we are collectively experiencing right now in this moment of pandemic, global uprising, climate crisis, all of it. We really know that our art forms, our stories and songs are the things that bring us joy and sustain us and hold great lessons for us around organizing and survival. And we know that our stories and songs will outlive us all. And so we offer that, in terms of thinking about this moment. What would you add, Ron, to that?
We focus a lot on legacy, as you'll see in this report back. And if you go to our website, freedommaps.us, and download the full report, the report is rich with stories, many of them rooted in our interviewees and other folks' recognition of the legacies in which they're working. So we want to remind us all that our people have survived many, many things, and that we are children of the ones who did not die, as a song that Harold Stewart taught me once upon a time. Actually, Tafara Waller Muhammad taught me, and Harold taught her, I believe. So we also just want to root this work in generational thinking and understanding that we are the inheritors, those of us presently living, are the inheritors of powerful ancestral technologies that we believe can help us shift power, can move resources, and can help us move with grounding in very shaky and uncertain terrain. So we're hopeful as we think through this report, and confident that we have everything that we need to do the work that we need to do. That's a big part of the work that Cherry and I have been doing and learning about with this research.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. And in terms of how we'll spend our time together today, so we'll review the key findings. We'll have a brief Q&A with all of y'all. We'll break out into some small groups to discuss a few questions, and then we'll gather back up for report backs and close out. And so I'm going to kick it to Ron to get us going.
Thank you. And Lauren, can we get the next slide, please? Awesome. So everyone, we're really grateful to Alternate Roots, as well as to our friends at Ignite Art Dallas for being partners with us in what has actually been the second phase of a project that began back in 2017. This research was originally commissioned by the Ford Foundation to inform some strategic work that they were doing, thinking through cross-programmatic efforts to support the South. And we were not able to move forward to a public version of the report with Ford. And so we're very grateful that Alternate Roots and Ignite Arts Dallas were down for the ride and helping us get this beautiful research out into the public. So thank you, Roots family, and the many, many folks from Roots who participated in various ways. Next slide. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our values, which you'll see right here. These were very essential. And for those who aren't following along visually, our values are storytelling equals or is research, that we center the margins in this work, that we focus on grassroots organizing and efforts, and that we share examples of good work. So we're illustrating as we go. So these were the grounding compass. These were the parts of the compass, if you will, that guided our decision-making as we went through and learned a lot and gathered and heard a lot of beautiful stories from many different people. Next slide. So our guiding questions were basically the core of our research practice for this work. We were interested in the current state of artistic practice in the South, how people were making things, what they were making, where they were making them, all the questions. We were deeply curious to know what and how people were doing. And we also, in the realm of how people were doing, were interested in the infrastructure that was supporting the work of arts and culture throughout the South region. That focused often on nonprofit spaces, but as you'll see, it was not limited to them. And the question last that we asked was how arts and culture workers are helping to build progressive political infrastructure through their efforts at the intersection of art, culture, and social justice. Next slide. So we did a bunch of stuff in pursuit of this research. We conducted interviews with 41 folks, most of whom were arts and cultural practitioners, so people who are actively engaging in arts and cultural work as a part of their practice. That's who we call practitioners. Most of the folks were practitioners in the South, but we also interviewed some people from grant-making institutions, from Americans for the Arts, for example, who could also provide a national view, because we were very interested in comparing and looking and contrasting what was happening in the South with what might be happening in other regions throughout the country. We conducted story circles in 5 places throughout the South as well, envisioning sessions where we asked people to envision their communities. Was it 2 generations forward, Cherry? Is that correct? 50 years-ish? And we asked them to tell us what they wanted their communities to be. And then we asked them to chart pathways to those futures that they articulated, looking specifically at the role that arts and culture could play. And we basically had people do some very fabulous crafting with vision boards. There's a lot of glue and glitter and fantabulousness. Lots of glitter, always lots of glitter with me and Jerry. We analyzed a bunch of secondary data sources to focus on quantitative information, which we'll focus on in one of the sections of this report back. And lastly, we had an advisory board of 11 beautiful folks, many of whom are part of the Roots community, who helped ground our research, provide reflection and feedback as we were going, and help make sure that we were abiding by our stated values. And this research, again, was conducted in 2 chunks. 2017 was the biggest chunk, 2017, 2018, and then we had another round of preparing the research for its public instance in 2019.
And if we could go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, were you done?
I'm all done, it's up to you.
Okay, did we skip the slide, perhaps?
I don't think so. I think we're on the map now.
Okay.
Oh, the map, is the map missing from the?
Oh, it's okay. I'll just talk through how we thought about the South real quick before we get into the first key finding. So we know that there's lots of definitions for the South, right? And so we define the South as a 14-state region and included Texas, and Maryland, and really drew heavily upon census definition of the South, as well as Roots definition of the South, and landed somewhere slightly in between. And it's just important, I think, to recognize that the definition of the South isn't widely agreed upon, but we felt good about just honoring regional definitions and right to self-determine, and really thought about, Roots' definition as a guiding light here, which says that, the organization supports creation and presentation of original art that is rooted in community, place, tradition, or spirit. And so getting into the first key finding, so legacy, the South celebrates a long lineage of work at the intersections of art, culture, and justice. And so this really underscores the importance of honoring and naming our history in Southern cultural organizing work. So every interviewee and most of our visioning session participants located their contemporary practice in the context of legacy and really paid homage to the teachers, mentors, organizations, and movements that trained them up and continue to inspire them. And this practice of speaking names and stories of our ancestors and learning from them is really a core value of Southern artists' work for change. So as you know, people really know their history, know where we're from, know and honor how we got here, right? And so what does this look like in practice? So it's naming our lineage, talking about who our people are, again, who our mentors, teachers, and communities are. We saw a lot of beautiful practices of self-archiving across the region. And so kind of community institutions serving as sites of memory and culture keeping. So some examples are Apple Shop, the Esperanza Center for Peace and Justice in San Antonio, Texas, the East Kentucky Social Club, Roots, and the New Orleans Video Access Coalition. So each of those places really being committed to maintaining their archives. We also saw people name the importance of telling their own movement story. So just in the spirit of narrating our own struggles so that we're the ones to really tell those stories, and uplifting oral traditions. And lots of interviewees talked about the importance of multi-generational struggles in terms of thinking about longevity, that, the fights for justice that we've won took many lifetimes in some cases to achieve, right? And so the work that we're doing now within this lifetime, we may not see the outcomes of, but we know that it's going to contribute to future wins and that is so important. And one really beautiful practice around lineage and legacy we found in Southerners on New Ground. And so Southerners on New Ground builds a beloved community of LGBTQ people across the South who are ready and willing to do their part to challenge oppression in order to bring about liberation for all folks. And I think there's a lot of overlap between roots and song, which is a beautiful thing now.
Carrie, we're getting a message to slow down a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I get excited and start talking fast. And so a beautiful campaign that Song has is the Black Mama's Bailout that happens annually around Mother's Day. And Grace Nichols, who is a wonderful artist based in Durham, was a cultural organizing fellow with Song, and Grace shared that Song's bailout actions are rooted in the legacy of Black people buying each other's freedom, and how specifically this campaign brought attention to the ways that women, trans women, femmes, and femme-identifying people were often left out of the narrative of police brutality and mass incarceration. And so, we lift that up as a beautiful example. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the second key finding was around hybridity. So artists and culture workers engage across issues, artistic forms, and geographies. So when asked about communities to which they were accountable, all of our interviewees mentioned working in at least 2 geographic scopes. And there was a perception or experience that one needed to travel outside of the South often and to have a regional or national presence in order to obtain the resources necessary to do the work at home. A piece of this also was, that practitioners were working on a multitude of issues. As an example, it's hard to address the opioid epidemic in rural communities without tackling challenges of extractive industry and mining, and how rurality means that access to well-paid employment outside of those extractive industries can be challenging. So we're seeing sort of how extractive industry, rurality, geographic isolation, and, sort of lack of transportation infrastructure, intersect in that example. And so really just to say that artists are engaged in justice work and play multiple roles in their home communities and all of that. Is there anything else you would add for this one, Ron?
I wouldn't add too much, just to say that it's both about the forms in which people are working are hybrid. So there weren't a lot of people who were like, I'm just a this, I'm just a musician, or I'm just a filmmaker. A lot of it was about weaving and blending together genres and disciplines and ways of working in and with community that might not fit neatly into any sort of grant application checkbox. And that came to seem an important theme as Cherry and I went through all of the interviews and other stories that were shared with us.
Thank you. Yes. And there were a number of regional challenges that interviewees lifted up that they're working to address through their practices. So dismantling structural racism, disrupting criminalization and mass incarceration, including incarceration of migrants, healing the opioid epidemic, healing food inequity and food injustice, transportation, extractive industry, housing access, and all of that. And let's go to the next slide.
All right, I think it's my turn now. So this is our third key finding, which we've dubbed divestment. So it is very clear as we looked through those data sets and the quantitative data sets, all of the numbers from all over the country, that the South is clearly the least well-funded region of the United States when it comes to arts and culture, particularly as concerns private foundations and philanthropy. And one frame for this I want to say is back in 2010 to 2014, based on research from the National Center for Responsive Philanthropy, we already knew going into this research effort for Freedom Maps that the South was receiving only $41 in foundation funding per person compared to the national funding rate of $451 per person. That's an order of magnitude, 10 times as much. In New York State, it was $995 per person. So $41 per person in the South, $451 per person overall if we looked across the nation, and $995 per person in New York. And that's for overall philanthropic funding of many different kinds of things, from arts and culture to education to transportation to you name it. So we were going into this knowing that it was probably going to be a similar story once we looked at arts and culture specifically in the South. So what did we learn from our friends at Foundation Center, from the National Association of State Arts Agencies? I think it might be something else. That second A, NASA, the other NASA, and from Data Arts as well. Next slide, Lauren. So what you see here, the dark red line at the bottom is the South. And we're looking at funding trends from 2010, 2015, 2016, and 2017 of per capita private foundation support for nonprofit arts and culture. In 2017, a person living in the South received only $4.21 in arts and culture funding from philanthropy, compared to the national average, which is that black line in the middle there on the chart. The national average in 2017 was $8.60 per person. That's a little bit more than twice as much as folks in the South were getting when you looked at the national average. So you can see there's a really large variation between the regions, with the South hanging out at the bottom consistently year over year, and the Northeast really towering above everyone else. So we use census data from the American Community Survey in 2017 and in the other respective years to get these per capita numbers. So that's how you're seeing what you're seeing. And as a quick note, the Foundation Center data set that we were using specifically focused on the largest foundations in the country, the top 10,000, I believe, which is their research set. So we know that this isn't a full picture of what's happening in philanthropy, but it's a picture of what the philanthropy at the top, the people with the most money, the institutions with the biggest endowments are doing, which is a good indicator for how other entities often are moving as well. Next slide, Lauren. So we also wanted to check out comparisons of each of the states in our region in the South. And so I know we got the map up there a bit later in Cherry's spiel about the regions, but you can see the names down at the bottom of this chart along the horizontal axis. So you can see that a state like Arkansas, which the Walton Foundation, the Walmart money, is based in, had quite a large, talking about towering, these really do look like towers here. Maryland also having some spikes in 2016, but as you can see, everyone's pretty much hanging out below that national average line from 2017 of $8.60. And then you've got states like Alabama, like Mississippi, Kentucky, West Virginia, that are, even compared to other states in the South, very low, with less than $1 in some cases per person in arts and culture funding from philanthropy going to those communities. One of the interesting things we found is that it's actually the case that in this data set, Southern-based funders, so foundations or other grant-making institutions that are based in the South, they actually are providing 76% of private foundation dollars to Southern arts and cultural organizations. And that really runs counter to a narrative that's functioning in our region in the South and nationally, that it's these big foundations from New York or other places funding in the South, and they only fund so-and-so because they're not in our communities. What's really happening, interestingly enough, at least across the region, is that these Southern funders are the ones who are supporting Southern arts and culture the most. But then we get into a question of, well, what exactly are they funding though? And that's an interesting question. So we wanted to dig a little bit deeper on that too. And there really needs to be another layer of research that Cherry and I aren't currently on deck to do. But to get at some of the nuance for these questions, we did ask a few other things of the data. So one of the things that we found is that between 2015 and 2017, organizations that had budgets of more than $10 million got up to 62% of funding in the US South in a given year. Those organizations got 62% of funding, the biggest organizations, budgets of above $10 million. But they only make up 12% of the organizations in the sample. So this is a huge amount of money going to a handful of organizations, or at least not most of them. 12%. So we have a sense that, like other research that's happening about arts and culture across the nation, for example, I'm blanking. Why am I blanking on the name of the Helicon report? Somebody help me. I know somebody knows the name of it. I'm having a brain moment. Anyway, we can put that in the chat later. There is other research that basically says big institutions, often whiter institutions with wealthier and more traditionally educated, institutionally educated audiences get the most of the money. That is playing out in the South as well. Next slide, Lauren. So we did take a look at some public funding, state arts agency level. We didn't get down to the local arts agencies, but we thought this would be an interesting snapshot to share as well. And again, the South is toward the bottom. The West is bottoming out in this case. So we're doing a little bit better on the public funding side when we look at regions comparatively. But it's still the case that folks are getting pretty little money from the state's arts agencies throughout the South, roughly 50 cents per person. So one of the things that we also wanted to look at was rurality, and we weren't able to break this out by region due to cost constraints, to be transparent. However, we did find that in 2017, about 6% of funding, this is going back to philanthropy now, is going to non-metro areas, which include rural places. So a lot of these inequities that are playing out, Helicon report, not just money. Thank you, Karen Atlas. It's in the chat for those who are interested. That rural places are still being overlooked as well. And we would anticipate that that pattern be reflected in the South too, though we can't say for sure. Last slide in this section, Lauren, next one. So this is looking at all revenue. Since we weren't able to get into all of the details, we had our friends at Data Arts make us some maps. And we looked at all total revenue coming into nonprofit coffers in 2017 in this map. And you can see that for the most part, the South is in this fairly light blue side. And actually, when you look around the country, a lot of the country is in the fairly light blue. That being said, we have a few dark spots in the South up here with Virginia and Maryland. But for the most part, we're looking at a pretty pale blue swath across the South, stretching from Texas all the way up to North Carolina, with West Virginia looking particularly pale there, and Louisiana and Mississippi also on the lighter end of the scale. So again, there are many, many deeper dives we could take into some of this, but we think this is just a taste of what we know to be true from the stories on the ground that we're hearing from folks and that we heard reflected throughout our interviews and our visioning sessions. And so Cherry's going to talk about how people are then adapting to this environment in which we find ourselves.
All right. So we heard those numbers, right? And we know, not just based on those numbers, but I think on our own experiences, right? Just how, we've had to make stuff happen sort of oftentimes outside of the C3 structure, and, kind of on our own, right? And so how do we make that happen? We do it via solidarity economies. And what does that mean? It means we share our stuff, right? And so solidarity economies really sustain artists working in the South. For folks who might be new to this term, it's defined by endeavors that aim to improve the quality of life or redistribute resources in a community or region through efforts outside of capitalist structures. And so it's things like alternative systems of mutual support, resource sharing, collaborations, and really building on longstanding traditions of Southern self-determination. So if we think about things like maroon communities, feeding people from the church annex, all of these self-made systems that are sometimes invisible to those who are not participating in them, and which can make, folks looking to invest in or support them from the outside challenging. And so, we think of some examples that we heard about. So folks from the New Orleans Film Society, talked about the ways in which filmmakers are constantly sharing equipment and working on each other's projects to bring them to life. And we see this a lot also within the performance sphere. So really sharing resources outside of formal structures. Some other examples we want to lift up are Intransitive, our friends based in Arkansas, who really do a lot of work at the intersections of migrant justice, supporting trans women of color, and art and culture. They share equipment with folks who share their space. When one organization gets a grant, they might make a significant purchase that then their sibling organizations can also utilize. So stuff like that. As the report talks about, there's just deep gaps in philanthropic support for arts and culture throughout the South, which makes this so important. And so, we see this take place through things like exchanging goods and services, also sharing spaces and venues. So everything from rehearsal spaces to production spaces, really using our different networks. Like, one thing that came up a few times was how integral the Roots network was to particularly like touring work, and how, Roots was the place where you knew that you could go crash on somebody's couch, if you were on the road, trying to get your work out there. So networks, and, having committed space for creative practice and cultural production, emerging as a key part of Southern cooperatives. So if we go to the next slide, because this was a report, that was initially commissioned by Ford, we have a set of recommendations for funders. And so they are begin by listening. We should always, those of us who work in sort of resource organizing or philanthropy spaces, be deeply listening to folks. We should also be checking our framework, right? So folks who come from other regions, often find that they're operating with a framework that doesn't necessarily operate in the South. And so taking time to learn about, how power operates in the region, how the work is getting done, all of that, to consider community-driven or participatory philanthropic models. So what is it like to put decisions in the hands of the people on the ground? And so, there's been some good models emerging out of that. I would say Roots is a great model for that. And Our Place America, I'm going to forget the name of it, the Appalachian Giving Circle. Ron, do you remember? Anyway, but that was a participatory model. And Foundation for Louisiana is also doing a participatory model. To resource our existing community cultural institutions. This is so important. So when we think about longevity, when we think about, those institutions as places of cultural memory, of archiving, of keeping, community memory alive, how important it is to resource them, to support the development of local artists and their work on their own terms, and to make long-term capital investments in existing community assets and projects. And if we can go to the next slide. So we also thought that it would be great to have a list of considerations for resource organizations, starting with consider who has power in the region and where power lies, right? And when we find ourselves in decision-making places, we can either dismantle white supremacy and, or uphold it through our practices, right? And so just consider our power and how we, work to end oppressive systems and structures in the region. And so don't replicate extractive processes. Our people, our lands are taken from again and again. Thinking about how we're using the resources available to us to support Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. How are we supporting rural arts and culture, undocumented artists, trans and queer artists, artists with disabilities? How can we support these communities inside of our missions, or do missions need to change? And also, if you have positional power, how do you give up or share your power in the name of justice and equity? So particularly thinking about white curators and directors, transplant curators and directors, national organizations headquartered in the South. And if we could go to the next slide. So thinking about national arts centers, residency programs, and venues, just thinking about, are you reaching Southerners? And, particularly, are you reaching folks on the margins in the South? How are you embracing hybrid practices in the curatorial work and vision? And how do we move beyond, blinders of aesthetic legibility? And for larger institutions in the South, all of the above, plus what values inform your work? What work does your community need and want to experience in this moment? And how do you know? And how are you supporting the longstanding work of organizations and community institutions that have never received adequate resources, but have been doing the work to sustain arts and cultural communities? So if we could go to the next slide. All right, so we are going to invite some questions from y'all. We have about 10 minutes and we want to focus this part of questions, our question and answer, on really clarity. So, are there things that we presented that you want more clarity on? So yeah, let's go. And Wendy shares.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. Got it.
Wendy shares that we can drop questions in the chat or raise your hand. All right, so we have a question from Carlton. Thank you, Carlton. And Carlton asked, how did religious institutions show up in the data?
That's a me question as the data person. Carlton, I actually don't know how Foundation Center allocates churches, which are nonprofit organizations, inside of their data set. I actually don't know that. That's a very important question and something I would actually love to follow up with them about. What I do know is that within the Foundation Center data set, we asked specifically for organizations that the Foundation Center sort of systematically codes as arts and cultural organizations. And we asked for grant-making activity, so at the level of the foundation saying, this is a grant and we're giving it for arts and cultural work. So we did a both and in terms of the data set that we're pulling from. So there may well be religious organizations, churches included, that received funds for arts and cultural work. Or there may be arts and cultural institutions doing like spiritual and or religiously facing activities that were included in the data set, but we didn't pull those out specifically. So I can't answer the question with any more detail than that. But that would be a very good follow-up part to dive deeper into the data. Foundation Center is very expensive. Like you pay for every number in the spreadsheet. So we couldn't go as deep in some areas as we would have liked. Oh, we got questions coming in.
Yeah, so it looks like our next one, how did you define margins of the South? So I could start with that. So definitely Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, rural communities, trans, queer, non-binary, GNC communities. What else would you add, Ron?
We have a list.
I know, I'm trying to recall it here.
Carrie's done a very good job listing a robust sample, or subset of communities. We were specific about saying we wanted folks who have those intersecting identities and or experiences as part of our interviewee pool, as part of the folks that we were asking community partners during the vision sessions to make sure we're in the room based on the demographics of their communities. So we tried to be intentional at every stage of basically not centering cis, white, straight, rich, able-bodied men who were born in this country and have citizenship here. That was a general gist. But we had a very specific set of lists that we used when we were reaching out to partners and in our own work. There's Lisa has, I'd love to hear a story from one of your story circles. Oh, okay, I have one. We did a story circle in Miami, and in Miami, we were asking people to vision forward 50 years. And given rising sea levels due to our warming climate, many people in the room acknowledged that Miami would mostly be underwater in 50 years, most likely, or would be an archipelago, and a lot of it would be submerged. And so when we were going around after folks had finished their visioning sessions, they were in small groups around giant poster boards with construction paper and fun tape and markers and paint. And one of the groups built a three-dimensional structure that was up on like stilts, basically, and like a floating house that they were orienting their dreaming around, what the architecture for the city of Miami could be that would enable people to stay. So one of the refrains that we heard as people thought about their communities, many of which were under some sort of environmental, economic threat, that people wanted to stay in their communities. No one imagined leaving their communities in 50 years. Even people who could imagine it being very tough. So there was something that was very much leaning into resiliency, legacy, and just this commitment to place that was very consistent everywhere we went. We spoke to hundreds of people collectively, or like overall in these visioning circles. I think it was somewhere about 150. So the commitment to place was very, very strong everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might have time for one or two more questions, and we've got a bunch. So folks, we know we're gonna save this. It's recorded, and hopefully we can save the chat. So Cherry and I can do our best to respond to these. And we have a blog on our website, so that might be a really good place for us to do it. Is to say, here's some questions we got at this session. Go to Roots Week, friends who are not currently going, and here are the questions. So we can make that commitment if we don't get to your question. Cherry, you want to pick one?
I'm trying to scroll here and my computer's not cooperating. Do you see one that we haven't answered yet?
We got a question. The next question in the list, just going top to bottom, was what was surprising to you throughout this research project? Anything come to mind for you, Cherry?
Yeah, I think, this idea, this mythology that I guess a lot of us have that, the Northern funders really support work that is happening in the South, and seeing that the data didn't actually match up with that belief. And so for me, there was a big curiosity around, how that mythology got created, and just all of that, and also like holding that up with the reality, which is why we did the other sorts of methodology, that so much of the work happens in the South outside of those office structures. So, knowing that the data piece, while it was critically, important to look at because it debunked myths like that, was only one part around how work was happening in the South. What about for you? Surprising things?
I just keep thinking about all the things that weren't surprising. I think something that, in that vein, it was surprising to me how consistently people were disappointed, and the extent to which almost everyone was disappointed with any large budget institutions in their communities. So pretty much consistently, we heard from folks in our interviews, as well as in our visioning sessions, that institutions that have been built up and have larger budgets, have more access to wealth, more assets, fancier spaces, whatever it might be, generally those well-resourced organizations are not supporting artists in their local communities. They want to bring stuff from outside, or they really pick and choose, or they hoard and gatekeep. So even if we're not talking about the philanthropic level and the flow of resources to communities from philanthropy, if we look at the institutions that do have resources in our communities, oftentimes, if they are arts and cultural nonprofit organizations, they're not actually supporting artists in their communities. And that led to this inquiry for us about, so what do people do? And that's where we got the solidarity economies coming through so consistently. It's like, well, we do it ourselves, basically. We self-produce. We make our own magic. We don't even call them. We don't apply for their commissioning program. We just do our own thing. And I don't think that's not true in other regions of the country. But given that the infrastructure in the South is already so underfunded, at least for these sort of mainstream arts and cultural organizations that are nonprofit organizations, not necessarily churches, important distinction, but folks are having to do it on their own. There's not even a fallback safety net, small organization network that's robust. It's sort of like the big ones or everyone else is getting crumbs.
Yeah, and then sort of building off something you said, one thing for me was around this link between extractive industry and those large institutions. So like when we look at Crystal Bridges, funded by Walmart money, Walmart absolutely is an extractive entity in the South and everywhere else that it exists, right? And if we look like very locally, looking at, some of the big funders in New Orleans particularly, that, get their money from the oil and gas industry. And so to me, there was this question around how are these extractive industries sort of dictating or controlling the art that goes into our communities, into these large institutions, and kind of making the links between, colonization, extractive industry, and cultural institutions as an extension of that. So all of that, and I know we could talk about this all night, but it's breakout room time. So we have 32 folks present, and we talked about 5 folks per breakout room. So let's do 6 breakout rooms, and 2 of them can have an extra person.
Luckily, we don't actually have to do the math.
Oh, okay.
It's so wonderful that
Can we switch to the next slide so that people can see the questions? Great. And I'm going to put them in the chat as well.
And if you want to, you may want to cut and paste the chat, because when you go into your breakout rooms, the chat does not go with you. So look at the chat. Oh, and thank you from the interpretation team. If you need Spanish language interpretation, please stay in the main room. You may get an invitation to go to a breakout, but please stay in the main room, because that is the only place where the interpretation feature is still working. So the Zoom is saying it would be 6 rooms with 4 to 5 participants per room. Is that cool, or you want me to go one more room?
That sounds fine. Can I just frame a little bit before we zoom away?
Please. And if you can read the questions for anyone that doesn't have access. Thank you.
Will do. So we're just going to we're going to say 12 minutes is what we're going to say, so that we can get back together. So we'll be back at 10 till the hour. And we just ask folks to go through these questions as fodder, but we want people to just connect around the findings. So examples: which of the key findings resonates most with you? Legacy, hybridity, divestment, solidarity. If someone could put those in the chat, that would be great too. Just the list of those key findings. How might you, can we go, there we go. There we are. Okay, how might you use these findings to support arts and cultural work in your community? What changes could you advocate for, and to whom? And the last question is, given this current moment, this wild spin that we are in, what are the concrete things artists and cultural workers are or could be doing to create portals to liberation, knowing that we're building on these legacies? So go off and discuss. And our request before you come back is for everybody to share 2 words about how this report made you feel, or these findings made you feel, and to come back with at least 1 person ready to paste a group poem about your feelings in the chat. That is our assignment. We know rooters are great at self-facilitation, so we are just going to trust that that's going to happen. 2-word feeling response to this findings is all you need to come back to the group with, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right. You're about to be magically moved into your breakout rooms. If you haven't done these before, you'll get a prompt on your screen to join the breakout room. Again, as a reminder to please, if you need Spanish language interpretation, to please stay in the main room. I am going to ask, since it's just a few of us in the main room, I'm going to ask that one of the interpretation team come off, and then we can add you back, just so you can also participate.
while folks are coming back, Wendy, just wanted to check in. Are y'all, do y'all have more announcements / how much time before we need to wrap it up?
We're good. We just have a few announcements to close, but yeah, we're doing good on time.
Okay, great. Looks like we've got folks coming back in full force now. All right.
Good luck extracting a 2-word summary from.
That's true. We were doing good on time.
Did you want that from each of us individually, or did you want a 2-word summary of what we in our 12-minute long small groups talked about?
Oh, I wasn't clear. My bad. I meant every person in the group could have their own 2 words and you could just.
Oh, hooray. Thank you. That's much easier.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting y'all to come to any consensus.
Not at Roots.
Cute. Well, we wanted to, it looks like probably everybody who's coming back is back. We just wanted to give folks some time to connect and chat with each other, because we know having data thrown at you, even if elegantly delivered as much as possible, can be a little bit much. Did people, can I just get some sort of visual signal for those who are visually signalable? Were folks able to put together 2-word responses? Did that happen? Yeah, I see a thumbs up. I see some kind ofs. I see some maybes. Okay, well, we had 6 groups. I think just to close out our time, it would be great to get like that little poetic snapshot from each group that wants to offer it. If groups need to offer some more lengthy something, keep it short. But can we just do group 1? Or that probably might be hard. I don't know if people remember the group numbers. Let's just popcorn it. I'm just gonna let it go. I'm gonna let that fly.
We were group 1, I think, but I'm not sure we found 2 words, but the one that from the 4 or 5 things that I have heard from everyone was legacy and solidarity. So we can keep that.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Glenn.
This is from our group as a whole: learning, compassion, caring, intercultural solidarity.
Hello, everyone. I can share from our group. I had some keywords that came through, like urban, rural, illuminating disparities, extractive industries, solidarity, community organizing, and cultural organizing, and dismantling systems.
Breakout Group 2 just had a poem, 2-word poem that we created, all of us together. It goes like this: damn, holy shit. That's it.
Oh man, yeah, wow. Any other groups or representatives thereof? All right. Well, I guess we can let it be. Lauren, could we get that last slide up? The very last slide with the contact info on the screen share tip. Although it's so nice to see everybody's lovely faces. So y'all, here's our contact information. I'll also include it in the chat. I know it's been in there before, but please visit our website, freedommaps.us, to read the report, download it, engage with some of our other content. You can also reach us at freedommappsreport@gmail.com if you want to holler at us at more length or have questions that have come up that you'd like us to respond to directly. That's one way to reach us. And then the last thing is you can check out our Instagram. We made some pretty things. And that is at freedom.maps.south.
Mm-hmm. And we'll also post about, future opportunities to learn more and all of that. Yeah.
A bit of a speaking tour going on over the next few months. We'll be at the Radically Rural Conference on the 24th of September. We might also be at the Social Capital Markets Conference that's happening online in October. So stay posted. More to come, as well as guest bloggers on our blog. Mm-hmm. We might be reaching out to you. Be prepared.
Yes. And Joycia shared that she created a Slack channel where we can continue the conversation, which I love Slack and I'm particularly excited about. So yeah, let's keep it going there. And somebody's asking about hard copies, and I just want to show you because it's so beautiful. Yeah, you can order one from the website. And yeah, it is, just remarkably beautiful to behold in person.
Thank you all for your attention and time. I think we can go back to the grid in case people want to.
Yeah, let's see everybody. Thank you all so much. Can we give, y'all are getting mad love in the chat. Make sure that you all save the chat. We'll have it available in some form, but if you want to save the chat, go to your chat where the blue line is, click on the three dots to the right, and you'll have an opportunity to save the chat. Before Lauren takes back, I'm taking a point of privilege, and I want to bring my brother Carlton in, and let's talk a little bit about Sip Culture's fund that's available, and redrop that in the chat, and we'll do a quick shout out for the Solidarity Fund as well. Carlton, can you come off mute for us? And
what do you want me to say?
Look, I know brothers like, sis, it's late. I know, but we also just want to, can we celebrate the beard real quick? We got to celebrate.
Oh my goodness, celebrating the beard.
Celebrating the beard. No, just if you can just let folks know the opportunity, because we talk so much about how under-resourced from philanthropy that the South is. We're at an interesting place right now where we have been fighting for some money from philanthropy, and there's some dollars coming in right now, mostly due to COVID, uprising, all the things. But if you can just let people know what opportunity through Sip Culture is happening as well, and then I'll talk a little bit about Solidarity 2.0.
Yeah. So first and foremost, thank you to the Ely partners. I have to call out the organizations, Alternate Roots, the First Peoples Fund, the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, PAI Foundation, have been working really hard with our partners at the Mellon Foundation, pushing them to make a contribution to the work of the artists that we all represent as organizations. Sip Culture is a part of that partnership, and we were we were able to get $5 million for the group. Roots got 1.25 million of that, and Sip Culture got 500,000, and we're distributing that to artists in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, and Tennessee. And we're really focusing on artists that are overlooked. You know, I talk about the church a lot. I'm not a super religious person, but I grew up in the church, and I know that the church is the most continuous supporter of the arts in the South, period. Like, we can talk about foundations all day long, but it's churches that have made the hugest contribution to lifelong artists. And so we're looking at folks like the bass player at the church and the gospel singer and the piano player that are also out of work because churches ain't playing. How do they get some money and some funding to continue to pay their bills, because they count on that money? So we're looking at all of the non-traditional artists, all the people who art is not represented on the proscenium stages or in the theaters or in the museums, but still make a huge contribution to the continuation of our cultures. That legacy work that the Freedom Maps is talking about. So ours is open until October 1st. We have grants starting at $2,500 to $5,000 for individual artists, and from $7,500 to $10,000 for organizations. And we'll distribute about $500,000 over the next 12 months. So we're really excited about it. And we've already had about 350 applications for our first round fund. We won't be able to get all of those, but we're going to do our best. And we are still partnering with and working with the other organizations to figure out how to make sure that we spread it out as much as possible, but also make significant chunks of funding.
Thank you so much, Carlton. Yeah, $5 million coming to artists in the South. Well, we've got about 1.5 coming to the South, a little more than that.
About 1.75, yeah.
1.75.
Plus the work from Nowlike, which also, they have a lot of Southern artists as well.
Yep. So, I mean, that's huge right now. And the Solidarity Fund 2.0 is a part of that. I don't do numbers. That's why they let me, have fun and cultural organizing team. But throughout Roots Weekend, we'll share some of those slides that have all the numbers of how much money we were able to get to individual artists. And when COVID hit, it was in about 20 days, we were able to start Solidarity, the first round of Solidarity funding, where we were able to get money directly into the hands of individual artists to help keep the lights on, to help get groceries, to help pay their rent. And we were up to about $2,500 that you could apply for a really quick application so that people could just get it. You applied by a Thursday, it was in your bank account come the next week. So we're on to the new phase of that with the Solidarity 2.0, which is a part of this ELE partnership. And I just want to give shout out to the ELE partners for going to those funding conversations and demanding that this money come to the South, demanding that this money come to Black and Brown people who are often overlooked, especially in the South. And for individual artists, not just organizations. And that's huge, y'all. And it was a lot of conversations. Michelle was coming back like, they're not listening. It's like you did all this work to be at the table, but then when an emergency happened, they wanted to just give it to the big white organizations. So they went back to that old model of what Ron and Cherry so beautifully put together in this research. So we're going to keep demanding that this model change. Having those voices at the table is so important. We talk all the time about representation, but making demands of these organizations. Michelle touched on in her remarks on the first day about the Southern Power Fund, where the goal is to raise $10 million to go to movement organizations and that are doing this work in the South, including arts and cultural organizations. We've got about 6 million of that we've raised so far. And I was thrilled to be able to start giving calls to people on Friday while we were at Roots Week. Hey, boo, we see you. Here's $40,000 to keep doing what you're doing. Best day ever. No strings attached. So thrilled. We may or may not have a recipient of one of those phone calls on the line right now. They would be the ones cheesing right now. Southern Organizer Academy. Natalie Neofak, we see you. That work is incredible. Keep doing that. All right. So we're thrilled to keep doing those kind of things, but it does take money. Don't want to talk too much about that. I'm assuming the Solidarity Fund got dropped in the chat. And last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to turn it back to the host, is what we know about rooters is I've got several calls that said, I don't think I should apply for this. And I was like, no, you should apply for this. Well, there are so many people that are doing worse than I'm doing. It's $1 million, y'all. We need to get it out. And what we know about rooters is if we give you $2,500, you're spreading that throughout your community. It's what Ron and Cherry just talked about. We support each other. So that money is multiplying in our communities through mutual aid efforts, through what was the other term that you used, Cherry? Solidarity economy?
Solidarity Economies.
Solidarity Economy. So please apply for this money. It's being phased. It's in different phases. Clarissa will talk a little bit more about that, about how that's being phased out. But please do apply because we understand how much support you are giving in your communities. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Lauren.
Everybody, give a round of applause for Ron and Cherry. Please give them some love in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank y'all.
Oh my God, that's my boob. Y'all did that. Yes, yes. We learned and we received that greatness. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. I really do hope that you all were stimulated this evening, that you learned something, that you were able to come together and really talk through this amazing work that they were able to do for us to really highlight and advocate for the work that we're doing. So thank you so much. With that being said, I'm going to bless you all with some music through my sister Catherine.
I'm sorry. You know what? I will take one more thing.
Go ahead, announcements. Anybody got any pop-up announcements? Let us know too. So Wendy first.
Can we please give a huge thank you to the tech team that's been holding it down for the past 2 days?
Y'all were amazing. This was so easy for us. Thank you.
Shout out to the interpretation team, bunch of linguists, who's doing double duty on the communications team and doing all of the translation for us, the written translation and interpretation.
Thank you. Gracias.
And to the staff who so lovingly show up, continuing to show up even though they've been working nonstop for the several weeks. Thank you, thank you. And to all of you, I know it's late where some of you are. It's real late for Auntie. You know, this is my bedtime. So thank y'all for being here with us tonight. And thank you to Lauren for hosting. Okay, now I think I'm done.
Thank you. Now we can get to our semi-dance party.
Mon.
That's your song, Mel. That's your song.
I love when Mel dances.
Yo estaba con mi amorcito, amorcito que quería, haciendo cositas tontas, cositas que no debía. Oímos pasos y voces, pues su padre estaba afuera. Mi Eva salió corriendo, yo me escondí en la bañera. El padre estaba inocente de lo que estaba pasando. Mi negra estaba asustada, mi negra estaba asustada y yo me estaba mojando. Simón, qué vacilón. Pedro Simón, salte de la bañera. Me llamo Pedro Simón, soy el hijo de mamá. Y por ese vacilón, por poco me llevo una bofeta. Pedro Simón, qué vacilón. Pedro Simón, salte de la bañera. Ahora me estoy mojando, aquí metido en la bañera. No sabe lo que daría por estar yo con mi negra. Simón, qué vacilón. Pedro Simón, salte de la bañera. El lío me he metido yo. Dios mío, ayúdame, no sé lo que voy a hacer. ¡Ay! ¡Uy, uy! ¡Ay, ay, ay! Pedro Simón, qué vacilón. Pedro Simón, salte de la bañera. Ahora yo estoy pensando y no sé lo que me espera. Si el padre de mi Eva me coge en esta Pedro Simón, qué vacilón. Pedro Simón, salte de la bañera. Cuando salga de la bañera me cogerá con la tijera. Oye, mamacita, no voy a correr, correr, Pedro correr. Simón, qué vacilón. Pedro Simón, salte de la bañera. Pedro Simón.
Yeah.
Yes. My Natalie.
All right, DJ Lauren.
No, that was DJ Catherine right there.
Oh, all right,
DJ
Catherine. Yes, honey.
Well, as we say goodbye, Wendy's got her fan out, and I had to give mine out too. Got a little warm, got a little caliente.
Ooh, that was beautiful, y'all. Thank you so much.
I love you all so much. But
Love
now it's time to go to bed. And drink some lemonade and some warm milk.
Oh, ma'am. We'll see y'all back at 9:30 tomorrow morning on this same Zoom. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for dancing with us, Ron. Thank you, and Cherry, for sharing with us. Love y'all.
Night, y'all.
Have a good one.